Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here and excited to share with you the efforts that have been undertaken over the last year and a half to create Michigan's first statewide housing plan. So why a statewide housing plan? Housing is essential to creating communities and thriving families. Unfortunately, too many households are struggling to find housing that's affordable and available in their communities. No region or county is exempt from these issues. Therefore, a collaborative approach was necessary to overcome these challenges and to create economic opportunities within our state. These approaches really look at leveraging resources, looking at the strengths within our communities, the need to grow our labor force, and also the need to combat long-standing inequities in housing. So there was a lot of data looked at and examined when creating the statewide housing plan. And so today I'm just going to highlight some key data points that really speaks to the state of Michigan and our housing challenges. Many households in Michigan are forced to survive versus thrive because housing is too expensive. Many renters are paying over 30% of their income on housing. Between 2013 and 2020, the cost of homes in Michigan increased by 84%, a huge increase compared to the national average of 33%. Almost half of the housing stock in Michigan is over 50 years old. A portion of these units have lead-based paint issues, overall housing quality issues, along with housing accessibility issues, thus requiring substantial rehab. Also, there has been a decrease in the number of building permits pulled in Michigan by 50%. A decrease in the number of new units has a substantial impact on Michigan's housing supply. Long-standing disparities has compromised individuals and families' access to housing and generational wealth building. The COVID pandemic amplified these disparities in housing access, as well as other indicators of health that impact the quality of life. These disparities exist along geographic and demographic dimensions throughout the state. Since 2008 financial crisis, Black homeownership rate has fallen behind, and the gap between Black and white households is now wider than it's been more than 50 years ago, before the passing of the 1968 Fair Housing Act, a federal law prohibiting housing discrimination. Additionally, a public housing discrimination survey was done, and it was really focused on evaluating the needs of housing in Michigan. And so the survey was conducted, focused on homeowners, home buyers, potential homeowners, and renters. And through that survey, a series of questions were asked around what are the challenges you're facing in your community? What discrimination issues are you dealing with? And based on that, the data showed that discrimination, or individuals felt they were dealing with discrimination based on their race, based on having a disability, based on having a criminal record, being a low-income household, which means making under $50,000 annually, in households with children. So we also looked at what was happening in our communities with individuals that are facing homelessness. And unfortunately, too many individuals and families are experiencing homelessness in Michigan. So close to 40,000 individuals were homeless in 2019. And just over 13,000 parents and children were homeless at this time. So the data shows that there is disparity in a number of different areas. And if you look at homelessness among African Americans, 50% of the homeless population is Black, but they only make up 14% of Michigan's population. Without stable housing, it's difficult to access health care, seek and maintain employment, maintain supportive social connections, access to healthy food, and manage day-to-day life. So now let's look at our housing ecosystem and the production of affordable and attainable housing in Michigan. Production of new housing falls short of our current housing demands. As a result, existing housing, generally the main supply of housing for middle income and low income families, is scarce. There's a great need for skilled laborers to help meet housing demands. And currently, there is a lack of diversity of laborers to help meet these demands. There's an opportunity to increase and diversify our pool of skilled workers in the construction and real estate industry. A diverse workforce provides more innovative ideas, unique perspectives, and aids contractors in being able to be more responsive to the diverse needs of their customers. So just want to touch on the economic struggles. Almost 40% of households struggle to afford basic necessities, and the struggle is real for many households throughout Michigan. Whether it's in a community with vacant rental housing is impacting the availability of housing for those who live there on a permanent basis, whether it's a community where an individual has a housing choice voucher and they're unable to find housing because a landlord is not willing to take the voucher. There are a number of issues related to housing that requires a comprehensive approach. So I want to talk just a little bit about the planning process that took place and those that were involved in helping to create the statewide housing plan. There was a public survey that was conducted that was sent across the state. We had a little bit over 6,500 responses. Landlords were also surveyed as part of this effort. Solution work groups include individuals who work in a number of different fields to provide feedback about the issues that they were dealing with serving their customers. Partner Advisory Council and a state agency group was established to help us identify goals and strategies for addressing these challenges. These were partners across the state of Michigan undertaking various efforts to address the housing challenges in Michigan. And then it was important that we engage individuals with lived experiences. Throughout the process, it was constantly discussed about you cannot create a strategy, you cannot address housing challenges unless you talk to individuals who are facing these challenges. And then you need to go further. Not only do you need to engage recognizing that our engagement and involvement doesn't end here. This is just the beginning of a continued conversation. And then we also engaged with housing experts across the nation in doing a benchmarking study to compare the Housing Finance Agency, MSHA, with other state agencies, and then experts to talk about what innovative ideas are taking place, what are the trends in the future, what should we be thinking about as we move forward. So over close to 7,000 individuals, and probably more than that, had the opportunity to share this discussion and to help us shape what was put into the plan for action. So the vision. Michigan's successful housing ecosystem provides safe, healthy, affordable, accessible, and attainable housing for all in a community of their choice. And this took some time to create because it was important that we talked about healthy housing, housing that would be affordable for individuals, attainable, people in the workforce who are close are far from their homes, they are far from their jobs, and it's difficult for them to find housing where they work. And then also the need to identify that we need to create housing for all. So the framing of the plan. There are key principles associated with the plan that were important in every aspect. And so within the priority areas that are identified, we made sure that we kept these principles in mind: equity, human-centeredness, community, inclusion, housing as a social determinant of health. We understand that the plan needs to connect to the work being led by many partners across the state to address those social determinants of health. And we also understand that we have to put people first as the core of the goals and the strategies. Throughout the 8 priority areas within the plan, a focus is on equity, and it is interwoven throughout all the priority areas. So I just wanted to highlight, we have 5 targets, 8 priorities, 37 goals, 134 strategies. These are the statewide targets. These targets on the screen are the minimum that will be achieved with the statewide housing plan, knowing that our goal is to address and serve more communities and assist in creating more housing to meet the needs of Michigan households. The implementation and reporting associated with this plan. The plan lays out how Michigan can address substantial housing needs and intersects with housing in order to improve the quality of life of our residents. The plan is a multi-layered approach that includes public-private partners, because the plan is a statewide plan. It is not a state agency plan. A lead statewide group will work with regional groups to undertake action planning to implement the goals and strategies outlined in the plan. And it's important to make sure that we address the concerns of our community. The plan will be tracked in regards to the progress being made, and a public dashboard will be shared. So I just want to mention, as we look forward and move forward, it's important that we work with partners across the state to address these issues. Partners from the block level, the neighborhood level, community groups, regional groups, state level groups, to successfully address the housing challenges facing Michigan residents. So just wanted to highlight, where can you go for more information, and when can you expect the plan? The plan will be coming out in the next couple of weeks, so look forward to that. If you want to get information on when that plan will be released and get access to it, I encourage you to go to MISHDA's website and sign up to receive our newsletter. And feel free to utilize this email to ask more questions about the statewide housing plan and how you can be engaged in impacting communities by helping to move the plan forward. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brian Calley, President and Chief Executive Officer, Small Business Association of Michigan; Mike Duggan, Mayor, City of Detroit; Amy Hovey, Housing Specialist, Michigan Development and Labor and Economic Opportunity; and Moderator Jason Pollitier, Senior Vice President, Market Manager, North Region, Community Development and Social Responsibility, Fifth Third Bank.
Nope, you're supposed to do that.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here on this esteemed panel back at the Mackinac Policy Conference. My name is Jason Pollitier, and I am the Market Manager for Community and Economic Development at Fifth Third Bank here in the state of Michigan and in Indiana. One housekeeping item before I get started. On your table, you should have some blue cards like this. If you have a question for this panel, we'll take questions at the end, but if you have a question, write your question on this card, and one of the team members from the regional chamber will come around and pick those cards up from you. just raise your hand once you have the question written out. All right. And without further ado, I'm going to jump right into the panel. So you heard from Tiffany about the housing plan for Michigan. And we know that fixing the Help Wanted sign in Michigan requires housing solutions. Our panel here is going to talk to us a little bit about that. And first up, I'm going to have a question for Mr. Mayor, Mayor Duggan. So Fifth Third has enjoyed a great partnership with the City of Detroit with the Strategic Neighborhood Fund and working with your team to put together the framework for the G7 neighborhood. So thank you for your leadership on that, first of all. So what other creative partnerships and projects has Detroit pursued in an effort to increase housing, both rental as well as home ownership?
Well, we deeply appreciate Fifth Third's partnership, and I'm going to talk to it as we go through because it's part of our strategies. But I would say the most creative is one that's produced 10,000 housing units. And it's going to surprise you. If you can build a 60 or 80 units of affordable housing, you've had quite an accomplishment. It takes a lot of work for all of us here to do that. We got 10,000 a different way. This city had 40,000 houses abandoned in basically the 10 years before I got elected. More than 200,000 people moved out of the city. And when the original assumption was you have to knock them all down, of course, you can't do anything with an abandoned house in Detroit. I had this idea that the housing stock in a lot of these houses were beautiful. But if you had a burned out house next door, you weren't going to go near it. So we went through and we've now taken down 22,000 burned out houses, but we have renovated and moved families into 10,000 houses that were empty 8 years ago. And if anybody here is interested, buildingdetroit.org, we auction 3 every day. Auction closes today at 5 o'clock. There's still time to get in. But when I set up this website, people said, this is crazy. Who's going to want to buy an abandoned house in the city of Detroit? We've had some go for as much as $100,000, but basically they go for $5,000 or $10,000. Here's the interesting thing. 70% of those houses have been bought by Detroiters, and 70% have been bought by people who are renters. So you had people who are paying $1,000 a month in rent who realize I can buy that house, I can fix it up, and I can pay the taxes for $800. I never have to worry about being evicted again. And so that has really helped blunt a lot of our issues. We've probably only got 4,000 or 5,000 more salvageable vacant houses left. But with the support of the people of Detroit who passed Proposal N, we're actually going through and securing all of those with polycarbonate covers over the doors and windows, fixing the roofs and sealing them, because before you had houses open to the air that deteriorated. Now we're preserving those because we see them as value, and that's probably been the single biggest factor that has kept us from looking like a number of other cities in the country with people really on the street.
Got it. Thank you, Mayor Duggan. Lieutenant Governor, well, my Lieutenant Governor. We've got a couple things in common. You're a former banker.
Right.
I'm also a banker. You're also a Laker. Grand Valley State University.
That's right. When I say go blue, that's what I'm talking about.
Me too. Same here. So go Lakers. Question for you. As we exit the pandemic, we've seen the Great Resignation, now called the Great Reassessment. With more people changing how and where they work, what are your members telling you about workforce changes, challenges, and opportunities in attracting and keeping talent?
It really has become the #1 concern across the board. We saw about a year ago in our own surveys it really rise up, just the difficulty in finding and in keeping talent. And naturally the pandemic and a lot of the changes, people moving around quite a bit, a lot more retirements for folks over age 55 made it pretty challenging too. But you know, it's like we're in this mindset sometimes where, you know, we think of job growth as being the main thing, and it's, you know, it's a very 2008 and 2009 mindset where it was the main thing that we needed. Today, as we, you know, that's not really the problem. It's accommodating the growth that's there, and so many of our communities around the state have really gotten to a point where attracting people in when there's great jobs that you really can attract people from all over the world, all over the country, all over the state to the opportunities that are being created. But if there's not decent or attainable housing available, then it's kind of a dead end for that growth. And so there's a growing frustration in that the demand is there for goods and services. The jobs are being created. The entrepreneurs are out there doing their thing and creating that opportunity, and yet, and pushing up wages and creating all this, creating an open door for somebody, and yet, in many areas of our state, the availability of housing is the thing that's in the way. We saw something started to happen in West Michigan and up toward Traverse City that we really hadn't ever seen, save for places like this where there's like shorter term migrant housing, like here on the island, but where employers actually are buying housing so that they can attract employees and have a house to sell them when they got there. They had never seen anything like that before, and yet that's literally happening in some areas. So if you see business owners that are getting to a point where they're literally willing to buy and rehab housing so that they can attract in talent, you know that it's gotten to a point where that we really hadn't seen before.
Yeah, we saw something similar to that back in the mid-2000s, right around 2005, 2006. And a project that I worked on in Benton Harbor, Michigan, the Harbor Shores project, where Whirlpool was one of the, as a major employer over there, they really wanted to turn the community around to be attractive for employees to live there and to really attract people from out of state. Thank you for that. Mrs. Hovey, Amy, long time friend.
We got something in common.
We got a whole bunch in common. I worked with your husband years ago, Mr. Tim, on a number of housing projects around the state. In your work in community development and philanthropy, have you ever seen a time when business, government, and housing have ever needed each other as much as they do now?
In my lifetime, probably not. But as somebody who's spent a ton of time in Flint, you can see where when the auto boom took place, you saw the impact that GM had on building neighborhoods just like that to meet the housing needs because of how important it was. Our issue is a little bit different because not only do we not have enough supply, as Tiffany talked about in some of the data with the statewide housing plan, it's very expensive. Our current workforce can't afford a lot of the housing that we do have, and some of our older housing that is more affordable needs repair. And so we are kind of trying to balance all of those issues, right? Unfortunately, our average household income is like $60,000, which sounds great, but an average cost to build a house is $250 a square foot. That's expensive. So what are we going to do about it? We all need to work together. Luckily at MISHTA, we've been given an appropriation to start some new programs to address workforce housing. We're looking at a program called Missing Middle that is going to kind of help those families making up to, I think it's about $80,000 for a family of four, to help subsidize housing so that they can afford to purchase or rent housing near their job. Hopefully that program will be coming out midsummer, I think. We also have a new program to work on energy efficiency that will be coming out hopefully later this month. And that really will help invest in our older housing stock. I think Tiffany was at 40% of our housing is over 50 years old in the state. This housing program will help invest about up to $25,000 per house to kind of bring up that housing stock, increase the quality so people will want to live there. We have one additional program called the Housing and Community Development Fund. It's $50 million, and that'll probably be sometime early fall coming out to address housing issues in Michigan. It's the most flexible of the programs, so I can't tell you exactly what it's going to fund, but I can tell you that it's going to help address some of those goals that are in the statewide housing plan. So we'll be looking forward to seeing that roll out. So it's a lot of money, right? A lot of additional money to focus on housing in Michigan, but it's not enough. It's not going to create that 75,000 housing units that we need in this state, so we all need to work together. We need to help leverage those funds with businesses, with banks, with philanthropy. We need to all work together to help meet the housing needs in the state.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Amy talked about the cost of building going up, but there's also something else going up, Mr. Mayor, the valuations of the housing stock, particularly in Detroit. And while the valuations are good for the homeowner, what challenges have emerged?
I know I worked really hard to get those valuations up. You had a lot of neighborhoods in the city that the houses were selling for $150,000 and they went down to $50,000 in 2009 and 2010. And for many in the black community, your home is your generational wealth. The amount of wealth that was wiped out was enormous. And so we've made a sustained effort to improve the quality of service in the neighborhoods, and our property values have come all the way back. But you're right, when that happens, people who might have been renting at a lower rate have fewer options. So here's the first thing we did. The Census Bureau may not be able to count them, but anybody who goes through Detroit knows there's a whole lot of people moving into town. I spent time in Washington, D.C. and in Brooklyn talking to the leaders who you had people of color moved out of the neighborhood through gentrification, not because somebody sat down and planned it out as a city, but because they weren't paying attention. I said, what did you learn? They said, the first thing we learned is this. When you have affordable housing with federal tax credits, preserve it. And Jason, you know how it works, but you get 30 years of tax credits, that 30 years runs out, you can now turn your apartment building into market rate. And that has happened in cities in this country, and you had seniors who might have lived there 15, 20 years kicked out of their houses overnight. Arthur Jemison, who first led our program, and then Donald Rencher and Julie Schneider, took a look at the list. And they went down, and these are hard conversations to have, to say to a building owner, I know next year you're going to have the right to go market. Let's have a conversation. If you'll extend 30 years so all the folks can stay here, you'll fix up their apartment units and commit to another 30 years, we have a significant amount of incentives for you. If you decide to go market, the city of Detroit bureaucracy is difficult to deal with in general, but it's going to be really difficult for you to deal with. 6,200 units have come up. 6,200 units have been renewed for an average of 30 years as affordable. We have not had one single person pushed out. Now, we want to build a statue to Gary Heidel, because MISTA has been a huge partner in a lot of these deals, as are several others. Then we're in the process of building 2,000 new units. We had help locally from what we call the Affordable Housing Fund. We take 20% of the sales of all city property and put it into that fund to supplement. Council President Mary Sheffield's here. She was the sponsor of that. And that, we attacked the rental costs, but there's another piece we have to attack. Detroit was once a very proud city on home ownership. And I keep saying this, you got a lot of people paying $1,000 a month in rent who could buy that house, pay the taxes, fix it up for $800. But why don't they? They don't have the down payment. And so we are getting ready to roll out an $8 million down payment assistance program for Detroiters, so that you're making that monthly rental payment now, get a place, own it, we'll give you the hand up to get in there, and now we got Detroiters owning houses, rebuilding that tradition. And so that's our plan. So property values going up is a good thing if you have a strategy as a community so that people aren't left behind.
That's amazing. Yeah, Gary needs a statue built for a number of reasons. Shout out to Gary Heidel at MISTA. So one of the things that Fifth Third has done as well, again, thanks to your leadership on a strategic neighborhood fund, we actually, based upon what we are doing here in Detroit, or what we're doing down there in Detroit, we actually adopted 9 other neighborhoods around the country.
Did you really?
To the Gratiot 7 Mile neighborhood.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're doing as part of that plan is focusing on affordable housing, as you might imagine. And just very recently, we are, in addition to the down payment assistance that we're going to be able to provide homeowners or home buyers in those neighborhoods, we're also going to be paying some of their closing costs for those home buyers.
Interesting.
So, Mr. Calley, back to you. We talked about the rising cost to Bill, we talked about rising valuations. When you pair that with unemployment, what is keeping small businesses and small business owners up at night?
Well, this, and with small business owners, you know, they live and work in the same community. So like this, the idea of like finding another place, like look around the country and where could we go and just like move the business. It's not really in the cards for a small business owner. They have the community that they have, the place where their reputation is, where they built their business, their contacts, where they live is all the same place. And so it all has to work. And so when I think of this housing plan, and I really am thankful for the leadership of MSHDA in putting together the first statewide housing plan. Although I do wonder, why'd you wait for the end of the Snyder administration, Gary, for that? I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek because we have a picture of him with not a statue, but a heart around it at SBAM, Gary, and the work that MSHDA does. Big fans. But the thing, I think of it as not working kind of in an island, but all the things in a community have to work in order for small businesses to reach their full potential. And so that means that it means affordable housing. People have to have a place to live and that they can afford and to start building that wealth. They also have to have schools that are performing for their kids. They have to have high-speed internet available. They need to have the child care available. And I think about the, like that down payment barrier and how it is time to increase the earned income tax credit. You know, back when that was reduced before, the biggest problem Michigan faced was not enough jobs. Now the problem is not enough people for the jobs that are out there. And so the idea of ramping that back up and creating a scenario where somebody could get an April windfall for a down payment on one of these houses and to maybe team it up with your $8 million down payment program. And all these things kind of work together and you can see how it could really build. And so that's really the key is to hit on all of these things so that it's just removing obstacles. People will be successful if insurmountable obstacles are pulled out of their way. So I think the thing that really keeps small businesses up is that the community itself is not going to work and it's going to be out of their control. They can control the widget they're making or the service that they're providing and the quality of it, but all the other things that have to happen in the community that are outside of their control are the things that they might be more concerned about. But I think about it, Mayor, when you first came to office, and I remember you working on things like ambulatory response time and police response time and fire and, these basic amenities and knowing down to the second. Well, the average is this many minutes and this many seconds. So the idea that those things have to work in order for the communities to work. And that's all of those things that are outside of the control of the entrepreneur are critical. And I'd put right at the center of it is housing for the workforce.
Yeah, no doubt. Again, if you have questions, be sure to write those down, and someone from the chamber will be around to collect those from you. Let's jump back over to you, Amy. So community. Mm-hmm. Community is a big factor in recruitment of new talent. How have you seen the need for organized and purposeful community development evolve after the pandemic, while workers having more flexibility and power? Has Michigan been doing a good job working together to attract new workers and neighbors?
Yeah. I think even pre-pandemic, we started to realize that jobs follow people rather than people follow jobs. And it's very important that we have great communities. And all the things, just like, Brian was alluding to, all have to work together. And I'm very new to state government. I've been there a couple months, and I gotta tell you, I've been very impressed with how the different departments are working together for community development. Even departments that might not know they're doing community development are actually doing community development. And people really understand that we need to have strong senses of place, right? And where I think housing is a huge component of it, lots of other things are as well. And just one example is, in Leo, they have a goal about activating public spaces. activating public spaces. And what I loved about it, it wasn't creating public spaces, but actually activating them. If we're creating parks, but no one's using them, we failed, right? And so it's really important that not only do we have resources and energy spent in creating cool places for people to be, but that we also have to make sure there's resources and capacity to activate those spaces so people want to be there and they're actually using those spaces. People want to walk. They want walkable communities more and more, right? They either want to be able to park their car and walk, or they want to walk from their housing unit. And so one of the things that we're also trying to work on is creating a diversified type of housing product, right? One does not fit, the single family home does not fit for everyone. And so really trying to make sure that we're putting our resources in meeting each individual community's housing needs, whether that's townhouses, whether it's apartment, whether it's for median income, low income folks, really trying to have a diversified housing production so that people want to live there, whether, you know, whether their type of housing is different than their neighbor's type of housing, right? And so I think really kind of looking at that, we create a more holistic type of community that's really diversified, and people want to live in diversified places with different cultures and different things going on. I think we have to think about that going forward and where we invest our resources. And I have been very impressed at the state and seeing how the different state departments work together and do their piece to try to create these really cool communities in Michigan for people to live.
Yeah, I think about when we were looking to bring people back downtown Detroit, and the whole buzzword of placemaking was like everywhere you looked, right? These terms of lighter, quicker, cheaper, with activating these spaces was also on the table.
So were you using those silent discos that they have in downtown Detroit?
Yeah, absolutely. Lighter, quicker, cheaper, right? It's kind of weird, though, when you go to one of those things and everybody's dancing with headphones on, but only they can hear the music. So it's like
Very
kind of
cool.
weird.
I
Very
missed
cool.
everything.
I'm so lost right now. I don't even know what's going on.
Oh, you got to come to Detroit. We'll hook you up. So, Mr. Mayor, rental housing is in demand everywhere. How is this impacting the residents of Detroit?
Well, the biggest issue really was during COVID, and had the federal government and the state not stepped in, it would have been frightening. But the program, the federal SARA program, we would have had 20,000 families evicted were it not for that program. And this isn't, you can't just blame the landlords. Landlords have mortgage payments and utility payments and upkeep. They couldn't just not get rent and keep going. On the other hand, you had a lot of tenants who didn't have jobs. And so it was a fascinating process to take something that didn't exist, set up a program that says, you can get in, we'll help you on the back rent. And we said to folks, and going forward, we don't have money to help you going forward, but we will put you into a rapid employment area with Nicole Sherrod-Freeman and our job training folks, so that you can not only get your back rent taken care of so it's not hanging over your head anymore, but going forward, you got a way to pay your rent. And then in order to do that, you had to set up a legal system. And we'd never done this before. We actually represented 20,000 families, and we figured out how to do it is you put the lawyers right in the courtroom as a house counsel. So every single tenant who showed up had somebody there. Now, if the landlord had a legitimate case, that's fine, but a lot of times folks are evicted because of the knowledge imbalance. And that was enormously helpful, and we learned a lot. And I was really pleased that City Council and Council President Sheffield have found a way to extend that forward, because that SARA money is running out. So what happens 6 months from now when there is that imbalance where a tenant is being treated unfairly, and between the very generous contribution the Gilbert Foundation just made and the funding coming from City Council, Detroit's going to be a place where landlords are going to have to respect the rights of tenants. Now, we're going to have a number of landlord repair and assistance programs because we want to help good landlords, but we also are going to say you're going to be respectful of tenants. And we have got to do this, because can you imagine if 20,000 people had been put out of their homes, what kind of chaos we would have had? And I'm really proud of the housing team and the job they did on that.
Yeah, it seems like that would feel like a pandemic of a different sort, wouldn't it?
Sure would.
Brian, How do SBAM members think the rising cost of housing are affecting their ability to hire, survive, and grow?
Yeah, the rising cost environment itself has really presented so many different challenges across the board. And if you think about the last time we really experienced anything somewhat similar to this, most people that own a business today did not own a business the last time we saw a rising cost environment quite like what we have. And it really infiltrates its way into every aspect of operating a business. And so as you think about like a smaller business doesn't have pricing power, not as a buyer or as a seller. So they get squeezed on both ends of a rising cost environment. So when you have housing costs that are rising and employees then naturally will require more just to make it or deal with that, it finds its way into just one more kind of squeeze on the margins of smaller businesses and putting them upside down. So it's showing up in a lot of different ways, but really it comes down to those basics. The cost of housing and the cost of energy are going to affect the cost of labor. And so as you put all these things together, it just starts stacking up, and then you end up with inflation. On housing, there's a different. I mean, there's been a supply constraint for some time, and that's these other kind of cost pressures pushing things up, but also you put a supply constraint on it as well, and then all of a sudden it starts building now to where it does seem unattainable for a lot of workers. So it really does come back to, in terms of the concerns that smaller businesses have today, it really does come back to one more of those factors that are really kind of outside of their control. No matter how well they manage their business, this problem is one that's kind of across the board in a community, and it's not one that they can outthink or outsmart or solve on their own. It really does require a community-wide plan and a lot of hands involved.
Yeah, we'd be fooling ourselves if we didn't think that all of this stuff was connected, right? Think back to Mayor Duggan's statement about a landlord not collecting rent. A landlord not collecting rent becomes a former landlord really quickly. Amy, given your experience around the housing industry, what new approach, product, or program would you like to see in Michigan?
I mean, I think there's quite a few, and I know we're starting to run a little bit short on time, so I'm going to just pick my favorite thing. And it's getting back to equity issue and really making sure that we address that and pay attention to that. HUD has been piloting a program across the country. Unfortunately, they're not piloting it in Michigan, but I'd really like to see them do so. And I know the MISHDA staff would be anxious to try to get some funding to do this. And this is where you take low-income families that are currently getting a housing choice voucher, those with children, because a lot of them are single mothers with children, in finding some additional resources to work with landlords and these families so that they can rent units in higher resource communities. Studies show that families do better rising out of poverty when they're not surrounded by poverty, right? And unfortunately, a lot of the housing policies that we have actually force some developers maybe into concentrating poverty a little bit more than they would choose to. But this program that's being piloted, I'd like to see it here. I'd like us to help get families into areas where they have good school districts, where they have great parks, where their kids feel safe walking down the street to their neighbor's, their friend's house, and really try to help lift families up. And so I'd love for us to try that here in Michigan. It's in New York and Pennsylvania and Ohio. Unfortunately, we don't have it here in Michigan. So we'd love to maybe use some of our Housing and Community Development Fund to pilot it. It'd be great if philanthropy wanted to help match that so we could really get that going here and really help the kids that live in Michigan.
Yeah. That reminds me of a quote. At any given time, you're becoming the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? If you think about mixed income neighborhoods, it really changes the trajectory.
It's hard to be in crisis and only live with people who are also in crisis.
Right.
Because your support system of your neighbor isn't there.
Right. Thank you. All right, questions from the audience. How much time, how's our time looking? We okay? What am I looking at?
Right down in front of you.
I can't see that.
Oh, 4 minutes.
I
4
literally
minutes.
can't see that. All right.
Put it where we can't see it, yeah.
All right. How can local municipalities collectively push for zoning return with support from the state, especially along transportation corridors? I'm not sure who that's for.
Yeah, well, I've got just an idea in terms of, we got big jobs announcements, big incentive plans to make them happen. It sure would be nice if, like, the local communities were kind of put on the spot to make changes in zoning to accommodate the housing required for some of these big projects. So communities really compete for these things, where you have a big investment, something that will be around for generations, but to just recognize at that point, there's not a bunch of excess housing for 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 more positions created in an area. So at that point, to say, okay, host community, this is something you really want to happen. Let's also, at the same time, make a commitment to changes in the master plan and the zoning plan in order to accommodate the amount of housing that you're going to need.
Anybody else want to take a stab at that one? All right, here's one. How can we leverage the single-family housing stock as an avenue for skills trade training to ultimately rebuild our workforce?
So this is something that Nicole Sherrod-Freeman is working on right now. Our problem is this: if you go back 7 or 8 years, the only people who were repairing a house in Detroit were projects the city was running. There just wasn't enough value. What's happened now is you can't find workers to fix the house, because you drive into any neighborhood in the city and there are people fixing their houses. That house that was worth $50,000 is now worth $150,000. People are putting a lot more into it, and we are really stretched thin. Heather Z is somewhere back here. She's letting contracts right now to do 1,000 roof repairs for low-income families in the city. Heather, you are going to find the roofers for the 1,000 roofs, aren't you? But here's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to build the workforce, because we actually have another 1,000 coming next year, right? And so what we're talking about doing is something that we've done in some other areas, but maybe pay $15 an hour to hire an additional person for every small business repairing houses in Detroit. We'll pay the salary for 6 months. You supervise them. At the end of 6 months, if they have value, you hire them. If they don't, then you don't have to. But it's part of our whole Skills for Life program. But can you imagine, I've seen this happen, where kids from the neighborhoods start hanging around and learning to hang drywall, and all of a sudden, 6 months later, these are very valuable workers. We have got to develop the talent. Right. We have got to develop the talent out of our own neighborhoods, and we're going to start hiring people ourselves at the city and placing them into small businesses. So anybody who wants to renovate a house in Detroit and have a small business, come talk to me, and I'm going to hire you an extra staff person.
And this will be available for small businesses and nonprofits?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Let's see how we're doing. Looks like our time is coming to a close. Thank you so much to this. Give a round of applause to this. Oh, wait. Pause, wait. We got more time. Okay, we got more time. So, all right.
It's just so riveting.
We're all like,
We've got more time, and I've got more questions. So, not so fast. We're not done yet. Let's see. Does fixing help wanted fix housing, or are jobs needs that support affordable housing chicken or egg?
Well, that's an interesting question. And it is something that's like actively in front of us right now, is attracting certain types of jobs and attracting certain types of people that can fill those certain types of jobs. And when you don't have the housing that's available, I mean, it's one of these areas where, thankfully right now, I don't think that we're in we're in a position where we have to wonder whether the demand is there. If you build it, will there be, like, there's tremendous demand for housing. And so I don't think we necessarily have to get to the bottom of the chicken or egg question. Now, with the way that costs have risen to 84%, compared to 33% across the country, obviously there's two sides of that transaction. If you're the one who owns a house already, well, your net worth has increased substantially. If you're trying to get into it, it becomes more of a barrier because of that cost increase. So we need the housing at every single different level, and creating that kind of that first. That's why what the mayor is talking about in terms of just help with the down payment and getting in. Especially if you've already demonstrated the ability to pay rent. Then the idea of building equity, it's just right there, and it could be just that first thing to get you started in that starter housing, and to create a different type of trajectory for somebody's life. But the demand is so high, I think that at every level of income, that I think any type of new housing right now is going to be occupied.
If you don't mind, I'll add to that a little bit. I think one of the things that we haven't talked about a little bit, well, that's not true, Mayor Duggan, you talked about it some in your initial answer to your first question, is investing money into housing that already exists. So I did talk about, we have a little bit of money at MSHDA, but this is a huge issue across our state. As you drive through neighborhoods, you see how many people need a new roof, and a lot of them are homeowners. Who have been, that house has been in their family for decades and been passed down. And I think it's also important in a way where business, private banks, government can work together, is creating more home improvement programs that are accessible to people at different income levels, but also at different amounts of money that they need, right? And part of it goes back to not only, I might be able to afford to repay a loan that's at an affordable interest, but I don't know how to get a contractor. I don't understand that process. I don't know how to make sure that they're licensed. I don't, so I'm terrified of that. My house needs to be redone to be safe for my family. We need to be able to help provide those resources. Some of those smaller loans, as you know, especially for our workforce. Families, it's hard to access at banks. It's tricky. There's lots of, complex paperwork. You just even refinancing a home, but it's not your fault. But anyway, if we can build some capacity and have some housing navigators across the state to help people invest in their homes so they can stay in place and that they're continuing to build equity and pass it down to their families, I think is a huge issue that we can work on in the state as well.
Yeah. Here's another one. How, as a state, do we know when we have an income problem versus an affordability problem? And how do you know what to invest in?
That's the fundamental question. We have to build wealth. We can keep talking about folks can't afford this, and so the government has to pay for more and more housing costs. But two things have to happen at once. The government has to support those who are low income, but we got to create opportunities. And it's been so exciting in the city to see 5,000 jobs come into the Jeep plant, 2,000 jobs come into the GM plant. We're going to see a lot of high-end jobs come. We aren't talking more about skills upgrades and raising people's standard of living and wealth. If we can do both of those things, we'll finally solve this problem.
Yeah, one of the things that we just announced at Fifth Third a couple months ago is the increase to the minimum wage to $20 an hour.
That's great.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Can you discuss efforts to increase the MSHDA rule flexibility for small towns and rural areas? Scoring for walkability and this is a very specific question. Scoring for walkability and transportation often make it extra challenging in areas like northern Michigan.
And I don't like those rules either.
So I'm assuming
They weren't designed for
they're
Detroit
referring
either.
to the qualified allocation plan, like for LIHTC, right?
That's what it
Is that
sounds
we
like.
think?
Exactly
Yeah,
what they're
that's what it
talking
feels
about.
like.
You've skewed these rules for some areas that are not Detroit or
It
rural.
was Amy. She did
I
it.
think I'm
Who
going
did
to
it?
put it out there. I think the QAP scoring is not perfect, right? It's just not perfect. However, we all know that in this process, we take in a lot of public comment. And so, it's back out there, I think, for public comment now. We encourage you to provide that input, and not just your words, but also give us some data. That makes it easier for us to make changes and reallocate those point systems when we actually have the data to prove that those changes need to be made. Speak up, be loud, have some evidence.
How long is it out for public comment? Do we know?
Out for public comment only in terms of additional tax credits to deal with the cost of increased cost of construction. But we are getting ready to go out in the next few months for a new QAP.
Thank you.
Can I ask if the person who wrote that question would raise their hand? Because I want to see who my ally is from upstate Michigan. All right, we're going to talk at the end of this.
Thank you. Gary Heidel, the unofficial panelist. How does the statewide housing plan connect to state and local economic development strategies? Anybody want to take that one?
Do you want me to?
Sure.
I think the number one thing is making sure that we communicate the statewide housing plan to the local governments. They need to understand what's in that plan in order to make that connection. We have to help them be creative and innovative with their resources, with state resources, with philanthropy to help achieve those goals. I think Tiffany talked about in the implementation about doing it regionally, right? And so we're going to have regional stakeholders in each of these areas help with putting the goals together for their region and also coming up with an implementation strategy. So I think that's really the first step in making sure they're tied, making sure everyone knows what everyone's doing, getting their input and working together to achieve those goals and making sure that they are tied. Because what works for Detroit doesn't work for Alpena necessarily.
Yeah, I know in pre-pandemic times, CEDM used to hold town halls.
I think they still are.
To help
They're over there.
expand some of those conversations. Public-private partnership. Can you describe the programs? If private developers build, are they getting any assistance or lease programs? So can private developers qualify for some of the programs that we've got out there?
Qualify for most of them.
I will say that I must admit at this point, those 3 new programs I mentioned are not currently available for private developers. But that was written into the state legislation, so Michigan's hands are kind of tied with that. But we all know how to lobby your local lawmakers if you want to see changes in any state legislation.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Come see us. We'll support the private partnerships.
But I just, from a standpoint of scalability, it has to include private developers or else you'll never get there.
I couldn't agree more. Mm-hmm. Now we can give it up for this panel.
All right.
Thank you all.
All right. Good to see you, man.
Good.
Falling apart over here.
From Delta Faucets to Behr Paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.